Firewatch is a game where you spend 79 days alone in the woods. Throughout the game, you see exactly 3 people. You see 0 faces. Your only anchor to human life is through a radio that lets you speak to your boss. And as things progress, even that anchor becomes uncertain.
Delilah, for fuck's sake, answer your radio.
Firewatch is a game that's about loneliness. It's about seeking freedom from other people, freedom from society, freedom from life. But Campo Santo, the studio behind Firewatch, employs loneliness not only as a narrative device, but as a weapon.
No!
The first I expected. I mean, Firewatch is a game where you spend 79 days alone in the woods. After all, it only makes sense that loneliness is part of the narrative. But as the game progresses, your sanity starts to wane. Human interaction plays a very important part in keeping you tethered to reality, and having the entirety of your human interaction tied to a radio in your hand means that Campo Santo is constantly holding your sanity hostage. At any moment, that tether could snap, and Firewatch could turn from a beautiful game about the tranquility of nature into a psychological thriller that has you questioning what is truth and what is fiction.
Maybe I'm just losing my mind.
Because of how loneliness is weaponized, Firewatch becomes a game about walking around a park that isn't exactly a walk in the park. That was awful. I should not be allowed to make these anymore. Firewatch is one of hundreds of games that use the power of loneliness. It's no surprise that a feeling that common is used in all mediums, used in books, TV shows, movies, to emphasize narrative beats and tell the story in a more meaningful way. But because video games are interactive, and because a good developer can pull you into the world to the point where you feel a level of immersion that isn't possible in film or in books, loneliness can be used to a much greater effect. When done right, loneliness in games isn't just observed, it's experienced. It's felt. And that can be both a beautiful and a haunting experience. Today, we'll talk about the art of loneliness in games. Just like in all my videos, I'm going to be sharing very personal experiences here so that I can be as authentic as possible. But with that said, I'm only going to mention a handful of games today, so in the off chance that I miss the lonely game that hit you the hardest, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. With that being said, let's jump into a game that's impossible to separate from loneliness. Outer Wilds. Outer Wilds is a game about space. It's your favorite video game YouTuber's favorite video game, and it's a game that I struggled to resonate with until finally something clicked. In Outer Wilds, you begin each day peacefully. You wake up next to a familiar face, and there's a comforting campfire to your left that slowly crackles while you process your latest death. Within seconds, you're introduced to this beautiful juxtaposition. And after you wake up, you're given the chance to either turn to your left, roast a marshmallow and have a conversation you've had hundreds of times before, or you can go straight ahead, up an elevator that simply cannot be OSHA compliant, and into the great unknown. Now, spoiling Outer Wilds is a sin that I'm pretty sure just sends you to the 7th level of Dante's Inferno, so I'm obviously not gonna do that here today. But to give you a bit of backstory, the gameplay loop is basically wake up, fly ship, explore, read ancient text, learn, die, repeat. It's a game where the beauty is in the environmental storytelling, and the plot is uncovered entirely through your own discovery. And of course, Outer Wilds is a game about cosmic exploration. You're spending hours and hours with nothing but a massive expanse in front of you and the sound of your breath repeating in your ears. It's just you, truly and fully alone. In Outer Wilds, loneliness is a character that you can't see. It's a character you can't interact with. It's a character that says nothing and does nothing. But every time you get into that shitty elevator, it's a character that joins you on your adventure. At first, you hate loneliness. It makes you uncomfortable, and it's amplified by the lack of moving creatures in the game. For the vast majority of your playthrough, it is just you and the world. Beautiful environments, discovery, and the endless horror of space. It constantly makes you feel like something is going to jump out and scare you out of your spacesuit. And because loneliness doesn't have a mouth, it won't warn you like a normal character would. It won't cut the tension with a well-timed line of dialogue.
I used to be an adventurer like you.
It won't point out a line of nomai text that you stupidly overlooked, and it won't even clap when you finish the game. You can't rely on loneliness for anything except to make you painfully aware of your surroundings. But there's the beauty. Loneliness in the Outer Wilds is used to make you more present. So as you experience your little slice of universe, loneliness starts to become less scary. Each planet you discover has layers you can peel back to reveal endless depth, and the story is told in equal parts through uncovered text and through the worlds themselves. Incredibly, Outer Wilds is a game where the only progression is knowledge. The only thing stopping you from finishing the game is what you know. But of course, you're at the whim of a solar system that's barely inhabitable, with each planet trying to remain lifeless in different ways. Even if you should survive every 22 minutes, the game will kill you anyways. And as you die and die and die, the loneliness becomes more and more apparent. You can never form a bond with the characters because they won't remember any conversations you have. You can never vent about your unique problem because they'll call you insane. You're either an outcast or you're left to keep your struggle bottled up, waiting for someone that can relate. Over time, loneliness begins to be less of a thing you hate and fear and want to avoid, and instead, something you're drawn to. At the start of the game, the village feels safe and space feels dangerous. But as you explore by yourself, you realize that you've become addicted to the tranquility that exists in the nothingness. And so, loneliness is a character. And when you can finally call loneliness your friend, you finally understand the Outer Wilds. Loneliness as a character is a pretty common theme in games. Now, obviously, I'm using personification to explain the persistence of a feeling while you play. Like, there isn't literally a character sitting there named Loneliness telling me how to feel, but it was still a very intentional decision by the developers to have you experiencing loneliness in nearly everything you do, and to drive the intensity of the loneliness through the contrast between the interaction and the exploration. But enough about space. Let's bring things back to Earth. Arthur Morgan might be my favorite protagonist in any game I've ever played. He's masterfully voice acted, he experiences genuine growth throughout the game, and he's perfectly portrayed in a way that lets 24-year-old me feel like I'm him.
And a quarter. Don't forget the quarter. Shut up, Arthur.
The story in Red Dead is like if they smashed 50 westerns together and took their favorite tropes, but I think that's why it works so well. Rockstar is able to thread a beautiful storyline that moves with the land and focuses on people and emotions, with the action taking a secondary seat, which was a bold move for a game that, on the cover, seemed to be an action game about gunslinging and explosions and train robbery. But I think because Rockstar took the risky step of putting the narrative first, they were able to make a game that resonated with a wider audience. I often heard people talk about how much they enjoyed their time with Red Dead 2, but it wasn't until I played through it myself that I was able to understand the appeal. I mean, sure, it's fun to freeze time, line up 42 headshots, and watch Arthur go beast mode and hit them all, but that's not what I remember about my time with the game. I'll remember the beautiful rendition of the American Wild West, the epic storyline that ties itself together in a beautiful knot. I'll remember how Arthur is a flawed character, one that's able to intimidate and hurt and kill, but also capable of love, forgiveness, and growth. And ironically, when it comes to the theme of the video, I'll also remember the people that Rockstar so beautifully wrote into the game. The game is packed with random interactions that bring the world to life, giving the game depth and spontaneity and encouraging further immersion. But beyond that, Arthur is given a camp full of struggling Americans. This gang is his family. He joined when he was just a kid, and he was raised by Dutch to the point where he's more of a dad than Arthur's biological dad ever was. And while Dutch is the fiery lifeblood of the camp, he's evened out by Hosea, who, in this increasingly progressive rendition of the Wild West, might as well be Arthur's second dad. And the rest of the camp is no different. John is a brother, Jack is a nephew, Sadie is a sister. None of these connections are forged by blood, but it's all that Arthur has, and it's all that he's ever known. But despite having a camp full of people to surround him, Arthur Morgan is painfully alone. And the game makes sure that you feel this way. Rockstar might be a studio that struggles to give the players freedom in a deceptively open world, but they are experts at helping you empathize with their characters through intentional game design. Throughout the game, the camp is your home base. And even though the physical location moves as you keep getting into trouble, it always feels comfortable to return to camp after a long day's worth of cowboy. And the camp feels pretty interactive on the surface, but as time progresses, you start to realize just how transactional it is. They want your money so they can upgrade their services. They want your presence so that they can feel safe. They want your time so that you can do their bidding. And if you were Arthur, you might see things differently. You might be more empathetic to Dutch and try to get to the heart of his battle with the hand he was dealt. You might take tangible steps to unite the broken family between John, Abby, and Jack. And you might have the wisdom to see through the rough outer shell that creates a wall between Arthur and the rest of the camp. But you aren't Arthur. Arthur is a man raised by gunpowder and gold, and he'll never be able to bear his soul in a way that cracks through that wall. As much as he values the gang, and as much as he's put his life on the line for any of the gang members, to him, it's just all he knows. The reason he's there for them is just because it's the right thing to do. They might be his family, they might be all he knows, but he doesn't feel close to them. To him, he feels alienated. Returning to camp is just a tool that allows him to find reasons to do what he really feels is his purpose. To wander the world alone, just him, his horse, and the gun at his side. Now, Red Dead 2 is massive with loads of moving parts. And while I'd love to spend time talking to you about why it's so easy to accidentally kill your horse, why they hand you the best weapon in the game just a few hours into the story, why they added a button to harass people that stays there even after you're nice just to keep people on their toes, while I'd love to cover all of those topics, today I just want to talk to you about the simple moment when you enter and exit the camp. Because to me, that's the moment that forces the loneliness on the player more acutely than at any other point in the game. When you enter the camp, it's incredibly awkward. You're coming in at absolutely breakneck speed. Lenny is yelling at you and you're haphazardly hitting a button to say, "Hey, it's me, Arthur," before you get slowed to an absolute crawl and have to find a place to put your horse. You're looking at the compass to see which is the actual hitch, because out of the 14, only one of them is meant for you, and half the times you give up and just unmount, even though that's technically not optimal gameplay. After just a few seconds, we're off to a terrible start. And after you unmount your horse, you're gonna start spamming the run button, because this is a video game and god damn it, I want to move quickly. But Arthur's camp is like a swimming pool, and Rockstar is the lifeguard that has banned you from running. In camp, it's like you're moving through molasses, and that molasses pairs beautifully with the constantly changing homogeneous construction of the camp itself. Throughout the entire playthrough, I had no idea which camp is mine. Where is the goddamn stew? And God forbid I want to pick up an item, because I could be looking directly at the whiskey and the button will somehow be prompting me to pick up a Google Stadia. But then contrast that with the bliss of leaving the camp. You come in not knowing what's next. You leave with a purpose. Your button mashing finally pays off, and you go from moving through molasses to becoming one with the wind. The game's true meaning becomes obvious every time you leave. You're meant to run around and to do what you're told, and only come back to camp in order to do more of this. More of riding with the land, soaking in the incredible views, and of course, removing the heads from some goddamn O'Driscolls. I mean, I can't even draw my gun in camp. What is the point? Now, finally, I want you to think about who Arthur is closest with in the game. Who's the character you've heard him be the nicest to? The only character where Arthur truly sheds his gruff outer layer and lets himself be a little emotional. If you answered his horse, you were right. This game has a button simply dedicated to talking to your horse. And sure, it serves the purpose of keeping your horse from having a panic attack in the face of an alligator, but I personally got in the habit of, intentionally or not, pressing it nearly every time that I rode. These lines of horse dialogue are unlike anything else you will hear Arthur utter in the game. You're used to him being coy, clever, mocking, rude. If he's being kind, you'll have to pay attention to the words, because he's not exactly gonna smile. In most cases, Arthur Morgan is a man of few words. With that being said, Arthur has enough unique horse lines at level 4 bonding to create a 4.5-minute montage of his comforting phrases. If you do decide to look up this video, don't go to the comments section. And so as you play through the game, you start to realize there's two sides to Arthur. There's the gruff Arthur who can't share his secrets with what should be his closest friends, and there's the soft, caring Arthur whose best friend is his horse. Because in the end, that's all he knows. And maybe I'm being a bit of an English teacher, telling you that the author made the curtains blue because the character is sad, but I guarantee you that this was talked about by a team at Rockstar. Especially in a studio this big, every choice is made by a design committee, where one designer pitches, the rest gruel over every minute detail, and eventually, after much deliberation, you've decided that running will be done with the A button, even though it makes it so that you can't turn the camera while you run. Because of course, that's the point. So while you may understand that Arthur is experiencing this crippling loneliness through story beats and narrative clues, and even through his body language, the reason it's universally understood is because Rockstar makes you feel the loneliness while you play. At the end of the day, the Wild West is a heartbreaking place, and Red Dead 2 is a heartbreaking game. And as Arthur experiences these heartbreaking events, he just keeps moving. You make friends and they die. You trust and get betrayed. You love and you lose. As the player, you might need a minute to compose yourself, to process the loss, but Arthur is ready to keep fighting. Because that's all that he knows. At the end of the day, through everything, it's just him, his horse, and the gun at his side. In Hollow Knight, you aren't given a choice. The environment is crafted in a way that forces you to feel lonely. You have muted colors, sprawling, intricate landscapes devoid of direct guidance, and a hauntingly beautiful soundtrack that underscores the isolation of the game's world, all perfectly combining to force an atmosphere of solitary exploration. Before I get into it, I'd like to warn that I'll be lightly spoiling some environmental storytelling that the game does, and there's one cool thing that happens later in the game that I'm going to be talking about. In my opinion, it's nothing too major, but if you spent the last 7 years telling yourself you're going to eventually play Hollow Knight and you want to go in blind, I'd suggest you skip to the next section. With that said, let's dive into the world of Hollow Nest. Hollow Knight takes place underground, and Dirtmouth is almost as close to the surface as it gets, so it's not too different from what you'd expect the world above to be. There's no eldritch horrors, there's no mind-bending storytelling. It's just a nice, easy transition into the world that you're going to be spending the next 30 hours of your life in. Dirtmouth is almost entirely grayscale, with hints of blue seeping through in areas. You start to realize that Hollow Knight takes place in a world of perpetual twilight, where light is reduced to the level that starts to impact the vibrance of the color palette. That palette lets you know that you're leaving the world as you know it behind. You're descending deeper and deeper, and you don't know when you're going to reemerge. While intentionally a bit bland, Dirtmouth does a great job of guiding the player into the ominous, mysterious world of Hollow Knight, not by shouting the themes at the player, but through subtle environmental manipulation. But the Hollow Nest is not subtle for long. Later in the game, you enter the Deep Nest. If Dirtmouth is subtle and unassuming, the Deep Nest is overbearing and violent. After just a few steps, you realize that the world is starting to fight back. You're not wanted there. Deep Nest is painfully dark. The floor is littered with husks of decaying monsters and broken eggs belonging to creatures you hope are no longer there to stalk you like prey. You're not merely exploring a monster's lair, you're trapped in a nightmare. Deep Nest is Hollow Knight's stark reminder of the thin veneer separating the known from the unknown, separating comfort from terror. It's a place where the game's true nature is laid bare, and you'll be challenged to confront your fears and persevere against overwhelming odds. The environment of the Deep Nest underscores the game's theme of confronting a world that doesn't care for your existence. Each encounter, each narrowly avoided trap, each turn that tries to lead you astray, it all reinforces the feeling of being alone against a world that would rather see you gone. But if Deep Nest is an area that's mad at you, the Ancient Basin simply hates every fiber of your being. The basin wants you not only gone, but it wants you dead. In the entirety of Hollow Nest, nowhere is as devoid of color as the basin. Somehow our knight, between the white mask, gray armor, and gray cape, somehow we stick out like a vivid brushstroke on an empty canvas against the lifeless basin. Here, you're offered no warmth and no welcome. It's a stark, unforgiving environment that feels both ancient and lifeless, a place where remnants of a once great civilization now lie in ruin. The air feels heavy with the weight of forgotten history, and the silence is punctuated only by the sound of your own footsteps echoing off the cavernous walls. The game's masterful use of atmosphere is on full display here, with the minimalistic soundscape enhancing the feeling of isolation. It's a testament to the game's design that such a bleak, unforgiving place can be so captivating, so integral to the story it seeks to tell. But the joy of Hollow Knight is in the variety of landscapes you encounter. Not every area is as depressing and hateful as the Deep Nest or the Ancient Basin. In the Green Path, you wander through lush environments, teeming with life, bathed in a palette of vibrant greens and bright natural light. Even the soundtrack in the auditory atmosphere, which so far has been beautiful but definitely bleak, starts to be a bit more upbeat and lively. But this beauty comes with an underlying tension. You can't shake the feeling of being an outsider, an intruder in a natural paradise that thrives without the need for heroes like you. And as you descend into the City of Tears, the atmosphere shifts dramatically. In the city, the remnants of what once was a bustling metropolis paint a vivid picture of decline and loss. The decaying architecture hints at a past world filled with life and activity, now replaced with the silence and the hollow echoes of its former inhabitants. And that constant rain is calming at first, until you realize the raindrops are tears. You're watching a city weep at the sight of its unavoidable downfall. And finally, deep within the city, you encounter a pair of binoculars. You look through and you're met with a sprawling view. You spend so much time playing Hollow Knight, focused on the screen right in front of you. So much of the game is intentionally built to make you feel claustrophobic, but here they give you a moment of spatial respite. And what hit me in this moment is just how small I felt. Like, Hollow Knight is a little guy, sure, but the world is truly sprawling, and we're just so insignificant in comparison. The world cares so little about our suffering. All that's left to do is for us to just accept that fact and push forward. Hollow Knight is another game that has NPCs, but you don't feel any sense of closeness to them whatsoever. Even though your heart starts to feel a little lighter whenever you hear Cornifer's whistle, the relationship doesn't go any deeper than that. You rely on them, they rely on you. You're still alone. But late in the game, you get a glimpse of something that gives you hope. There's this flash of white that looks just like you. He just stands there, waiting. Everything about this game has taught you to be cautiously curious, but this feels different. Maybe your singular struggle isn't so singular. Maybe there's someone to share this reality with, someone who understands. And so you chase after this little guy. Sure, he's a little nervous and seems to be running away, but you chase regardless, holding on to that glimmer of hope. And then you approach a narrow corridor. As you walk, you hear a repeating clink. And finally you reach a platform where that mysterious Hollow Knight stands looking out, inviting you forward. Finally, after all of these hours, finally, you might not be so alone. But that hope is fleeting. As soon as you approach, his head tilts to the side and he starts to scream from within. Of course, this is Hollow Knight. Your struggle is singular. Even when you're given the most hope you've felt in the game thus far, the developers just snatch it away in an increasingly cruel manner. But of course, loneliness is part of what makes Hollow Knight so perfect. It's a game about the inherent solitude of the hero's journey. It's not just a game about fighting monsters or exploring dungeons. It's a meditation on the nature of heroism and the importance of persistence. It teaches you that even in a world that's indifferent and uncaring to your struggles, there's value in continuing to push forward, to explore, to fight, and to strive for something greater, even if that journey is taken alone. Loneliness has many uses in the medium of video games. Horror games use it to make us feel scared. Post-apocalyptic games use it to make the world building more immersive. But When developers use loneliness to force the player into a deeper level of engagement with the world, with the narrative, and the gameplay experience, I find it unbelievably rewarding. The games I spoke of today all use loneliness to mold their experience of playing their games in incredible ways, but the common thread I found is noticing how they empower you as a player. In these games, you're facing insurmountable odds, and no one's there to hold your hand. No one has your back, not even the developers. And this feeling of loneliness can be crippling, or it can cause you to persevere, to push back against the game and to fight to the next stage, to see it through until the end. And it's through that forced struggle that these games go from good to great. It's through this perseverance that the narrative of these games has been printed on my brain and impacted my worldview permanently. Loneliness is a great tool to use in any narrative experience. There are tons of books that have used it masterfully. There are tons of movies that have employed it to resonate with millions of viewers. But only through an interactive medium like video games can you experience it in a manner that's truly firsthand. And as painful as that can be sometimes, it's resulted in some of the most incredible narrative experiences in my life. So while I never thought I'd be saying it, I really can't wait for the next time a video game makes me feel lonely.